by the Electromotive Division of General Motors. It's a 2,250 horsepower locomotive. It was two 567B 12-cylinder prime movers. This locomotive has pulled both passenger and freight trains, operated in the cold winters of Chicago and the desert heat of Arizona. Originally it pulled long-distance passenger trains. Chicago and Northwestern owned the locomotive. It was number 5029B. In the early 1960s, it was rebuilt and used for commuter service. Rebuilt in 1974, and it became Metra number 515 and continued to serve on the Chicago and Northwestern. It was later acquired by Iowa Pacific Holdings for the Arizona Eastern Railway.
But still, I'm glad that, really? I think this one and one other, and then those two, and then next to that, they still got like 4 or 5 in the deadline. Those are somewhere along the way. I can get ahead of it. Okay, thank you. All right. Anyone else want to get in here? As soon as they start to move those two off the passenger train, I'm out of here.
We now have Chicago and Northwestern number 411 up on the turntable. CNW 411 is now owned by the Illinois Railway Museum. It's an F7 1,500 horsepower locomotive. It has a 567B 16-cylinder prime mover. The locomotive was built in 1949 by the Electromotive Division of General Motors. It was originally Chicago and Northwestern number 4082C, and the locomotive was used for commuter as well as railway museum. Purchased the locomotive in 2006, repainted it in Chicago and Northwestern paint, and numbered it 411. This locomotive regularly operates for the museum in Illinois with restored Chicago and Northwestern commuter cars. We're lucky to have members of the Illinois Railway Museum here with us. Next up we have Union Pacific 949, an E9 from Cheyenne, Wyoming. UP 949 is currently used by the Union Pacific Railroad in its excursion service, excuse me. Was used for executive train service. It was built in 1955 by the Electromotive Division of General Motors. It was originally 2,400 horsepower, came from 567C, dual prime movers, 12 cylinders. It's one of 3 E9 locomotives restored by Union Pacific for use in special service. The other ones are 951 and 963B. Inside its classic Streamliner exterior are modern mechanical components. It was rebuilt in 1993.
You're on form.
Number 949 has pulled such famous trains as the City of Los Angeles, City of Portland, City of San Francisco, City of St. Louis, and the Challenger. Next up we have Baltimore and Ohio, number 722A. It's currently owned by the Potomac Eagle Scenic Railroad. It is an F7 built in 1952 by EMD. It's a 1,500 horsepower locomotive with a 567B 16-cylinder prime mover. The locomotive was actually built for the Bessemer and Lake Erie Railroad. Spent much of its career on the B&LE in freight service throughout northwestern Pennsylvania and northeastern Ohio route of the B&LE. Its final years with that railroad were spent on the line's Kaler branch before it was retired to Larry's Truck and Electric. The Potomac Eagle Scenic Railroad acquired the engine in 2001 and repainted it in the line's own blue and gray paint scheme. In 2010, it was painted in the Baltimore and Ohio's passenger scheme, maintaining its original numbering. You can ride behind this locomotive on the Potomac Eagle Scenic Railroad. It provides service on the tourist line in northeastern West Virginia. New Haven 2019 is one of the unique locomotives that we have here on site today. This is an FL9 locomotive built in 1960 by EMD. It's 1,800 horsepower, has a 567D 16-cylinder prime mover. It is owned by the Railroad Museum of New England and it has just been restored. Work was done just a few weeks ago to complete the restoration, and in fact some last-minute things were done here at the museum this morning to get it ready for this event. The air whistle on the locomotive makes it unique. It sounds like a steam locomotive instead of a diesel. 60 FL9 locomotives were built for the New Haven, also known officially as the New York, New Haven, and Hartford Railroad. Third rail. This design allowed passenger trains from Grand Central Terminal to reach Boston and other non-electrified destinations without an engine change at New Haven. The locomotive's unusual truck design, 2 axles under the front truck and 3 under the rear, helped spread its weight to allow it to pass over the Park Avenue viaduct leading into Grand Central Terminal. It's the longest of the F units. It's 58 feet long, and it is also the youngest Streamliner at our event today. The Railroad Museum of New England representatives are on site, and we're happy to talk about the locomotive with you. We get to see this locomotive a lot, but most of the time it's undercover inside the roundhouse. We don't have it out to operate very often. The locomotive is owned by the North Carolina Department of Cultural Resources and the North Carolina Transportation Museum. It's an E3 locomotive built in 1939 by Electromotive, division of General Motors. It's 2,000 horsepower with 2 567A 12-cylinder prime movers. The 501 provided service on the ACL's Champion passenger route between New York City and Miami. It remained in service until 1970, accumulating more than 6 million operating miles and giving it the distinction of being the most traveled E-unit in the United States. The locomotive was purchased by the NC Department of Transportation in 1998 and was on long-term loan to the North Carolina Transportation Museum until ownership was recently transferred to the North Carolina Department of Cultural Resources and the NCTM. The locomotive is painted in its original purple and silver paint scheme. The locomotive is a 2,000 horsepower with 2 567 12-cylinder prime movers. It's known as the Silver Pilot, one of only 11 cab units of its type ever built, and it's the only one remaining in the world. All of these were built for the Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy, also known as the Burlington route or its subsidiaries. It was a Clinchfield's number 800 operating freight service through the Brakes International Park and on the Clinchfield system. Later, the unit was assigned to business train and passenger service across the newly formed Family Line system. In the 1980s, it was assigned to the CSX executive train, where it was repainted and renumbered as CSX T number 116. At one time, this locomotive in CSX paint teamed up with another one of its type and pulled the road railway trains through Kentucky on the route between Cincinnati and Atlanta. And road railway trains are trains that allow truck trailers to ride on the rails. That was a service that CSX provided for a few years, and this locomotive was one of those that pulled. The C&O Historical Society received this engine after it was retired by CSX in the early 1990s. It was repainted into the C&O passenger scheme and renumbered to 8016, and it's been on loan to the Potomac Scenic Railroad since 1994. And again, the Potomac Eagle folks are here on site, and they'll be able to give you some railroad museum. It's an EMD LP7 built in 1949. That's 1,500 horsepower and a 567B 16-cylinder prime mover.
All those classic glass, the railroad on a custom color. Dot makes it Boston again had the same maroon and gold. Sea Line had the same maroon and gold. Rock Island had the same maroon and gold.
This engine was originally built as a demonstrator locomotive as the railroads were transitioning from steam to diesel. It was sent to the Canadian Pacific Railway and then to its subsidiary, the Soo Line. The locomotive performed so well that the Soo Line purchased it in May of 1950. It originally pulled passenger trains such as the Laker from Chicago to Duluth, Minnesota, but spent the bulk of its career pulling freight trains, FP7 locomotives, for dual service. When it was retired in 1986, it was donated to the Lake Superior Railroad Museum and is underwent a massive restoration.
Do it this way. We always want an alcohol.
Alco Holland is coming to locomotive. Monticello Railway Museum leases this locomotive. A Montreal Locomotive Works 1959 product, FTA4. It's an 1,800 horsepower locomotive. Has a 251 12-cylinder prime mover and is built for the Canadian National. then, and it was transferred to Via Rail Canada. When Canada transitioned to a government-run rail passenger service, which is to our Amtrak service in the United States. Its last regular service was in the Toronto to Montreal corridor. It arrived at the Montreal Railway Museum in 1994 and was repainted in its as-built Canadian national colors. This locomotive is privately owned and leased to the Montreal Railway Museum.
There we go. Do it again. I don't know. I think you have to balance. Okay? That's exactly right. I also have to
Next up, we have Pan Am Railways number 1. Currently owned by and used in their service, Pan Am Railways uses the FP9 for executive trains. It was built in 1954 by the EMB division of General Motors, 1,750 horsepower locomotive, again with a 567C 16-cylinder prime mover. The locomotive was originally built for Canadian National as number 6505 and was placed in passenger service. It became part of Via Rail Canada in 1978, and Via sold the locomotive in the 1990s when it upgraded its passenger equipment. The locomotive was sold to New Hampshire's Conway Scenic Railway to provide tourist rail operations. In 2010, the locomotive was part of a trade between Conway Scenic Railway and Pan Am Railways, and it moved to its new home in Waterville, Maine, where it received the Pan Am Blue Paint Scheme and became PAR1. Pan Am Railways is North America's largest regional railroad system. Route stretch from St. John and St. Leonard in Nebraska. This locomotive, an FP7, is owned by the North Carolina Transportation Museum Foundation, which is a non-profit organization that supports the North Carolina Transportation Museum. The locomotive was built in 1950 by EMD. It's a 1,500 horsepower locomotive with a 567B 16-cylinder prime mover. Southern Railway used FP7s on their short branch line passenger trains throughout the system in the 1950s and 1960s. Locomotives had a steam generator on the rear of the locomotive, which increased its length by 4 feet, but also allowed it to provide steam for the passenger equipment. Number 6133 was operated by the Cincinnati, New Orleans, and Texas Pacific, which is a subsidiary of Southern Railway. It was donated to the North Carolina Transportation Museum Foundation in 1980, and the locomotive has been restored to its original green and imitation aluminum paint scheme. This locomotive is used on a regular basis, pulling our on-site train rides. Today it's a break because we have visitors that will pull some of our trains. We're happy to show off the 6133 as a part of our collection here at the North Carolina Transportation Museum. Next up, we have Pennsylvania Railroad number 5711. It's here with its partner 5809, also in Pennsylvania Railroad colors. The 5809 is not here at the Roundhouse with us today because it will power our excursion train between Charlotte and Spencer and back tomorrow. These locomotives are owned by the Juniata Terminal Company. They're E8 locomotives built in 1951 by EMD. 2,250 horsepower, and they have two 567B 12-cylinder prime movers. 5711 and the 5809. Spent time in service with the Pennsylvania Railroad, later Penn Central, Amtrak, and Conrail. Parent joined Conrail in 1976, where they served as part of the railroad's 3-unit executive train fleet as Conrail's 4020 and 4021. The third member of that fleet happens to be here today too. Number 4022 is now Erie Railroad number 833, which we'll see here shortly. These locomotives were purchased at auction by the Indiana Terminal Company in 2000 and 2002 from Norfolk Southern and CSX. With the split up of Conrail, one locomotive went to NS and one to CSX. The engines were restored and rebuilt at Indiana Terminal Company's Fairhill facility, located in milepost 83 on Amtrak's northeast quarter in Philadelphia. And we thank him and his company for sending these beautiful locomotives down to us. Next up is North Carolina Transportation Museum Southern 6900. We welcome the 6900 back to the museum. It's been gone for a while. Norfolk Southern took it to Roanoke and did some upgrades to it, and then sent it to Chattanooga for some paint work, and then brought it back to us just a week or so ago. So again, we owe a lot to Norfolk Southern in the work that they do for us. This locomotive was upgraded in a lot of ways. The ditch lights on the front of it were added several years ago in anticipation of another event. The 6900 is owned by the North Carolina Transportation Museum Foundation. It's an E8 built in 1951 by EMD. It's 2,250 horsepower and has 2567 V12 cylinder prime mover. The locomotive was originally number 2933. It was one of 17 E8s ordered by the Southern Railway. They were used to pull passenger trains that included the Southerner, the Crescent, and the Peach Queen. The 6900 ended its career with Southern, pulling the Southern Crescent from Washington, D.C. to Atlanta. As many know, Southern Railway was a late entry into Amtrak. The 6900 served for the Southern until Amtrak took over. The engine was donated to the North Carolina Transportation Museum Foundation by Southern Railway in 1980. It carries its historic 1970s era Southern Crescent logo. Currently owned by the New York and Greenwood Lake Railway. It was built in 1951 by EMD. The 833 was the last E8 built for Erie Railroad and is the last Erie E8 in existence. In 1976, it moved to Conrail as number 4022. And served as part of a 3-unit office car fleet, which included the 4020 and 4021, which became the Pennsylvania Railroad units we saw earlier. 4022 was purchased by the New York and Greenwood Lake Railway in 2007. It now bears its original paint scheme. It's often displayed on the historic Erie turntable in Port Jervis, New York, where it previously passed through. looking at Norfolk Southern 4271, one of two F9As that Norfolk Southern uses in its executive train service. The 4270 is also here. It is down in the yard providing power for the Norfolk Southern train that's here with its employees. This is an F9 built in 1952 by EMD. It was originally 1,750 horsepower with a 567C 16-cylinder prime mover. Norfolk Southern's executive units are used across Norfolk Southern system for traveling with company executives. In 2006, the company decided to replace their modern executive units with two classic diesel locomotives, 4270 and 4271. Both units were originally built for the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad. Rebuilt in 1981, they went to work for the Maryland Rail Commuter Service, or MARC. Later, the units were used by Rail Crews America for intertrain service. They were later picked up by Kansas City Southern. Once declared surplus by KCS, they were sold to an equipment broker who sold the locomotives to Norfolk Southern. After a full overhaul, the engines now wear the tuxedo paint scheme, inspired by the Southern Railway paint scheme and Norfolk Southern's corporate symbol, the thoroughbred. Delaware, Lackawanna, and Western 664 up on the turntable. The Lackawanna Railroad F3. It was built in 1948 by EMD. It's a 1,500 horsepower locomotive with a 567B 16-cylinder prime mover. This locomotive and sister 663, as well as B unit 664B, are all here. Locomotives are owned by the Tri-State Railway Historical Society and the Anthracite Railroad Historical Society. Folks from the Anthracite Railroad Historical Society are here in the roundhouse to talk about their projects and their locomotive. These Lackawanna painted units are the oldest operational F units in the United States. They're based in Scranton, Pennsylvania, and often operate at Steamtown National Historic Site. Former Bagger and Aerostic units. Colors of the mainline railroad are for the Lackawanna, which serves Scranton. More than 1,100 F3A locomotives were built, but only 4 of this type, which have a chicken wire screening, survive. While many units have been modified over the years, this locomotive has the as-built 1948 appearance, both inside and outside. The 664B, which is also here, along with the 663, will be used in an AVA laptop during our event. Being brought out on the turntable now is our longest distance traveler, Nickel Plate Road 190, PA1, owned by Doyle McCormick, Portland, Oregon. The locomotive came from Portland across Burlington, Northern Santa Fe into Chicago, where it was interchanged to Norfolk Southern and made its way here for the Heritage event, or for the Streamliner event. We're very happy to have the locomotive here. Doyle's here as well. He drove all the way from Oregon with it. It was built in 1948 by the American Locomotive Company, and also known as ALCO. It was built as Santa Fe number 62L, retired and sold to the Delaware and Hudson around 1967, where it became D&H number 18. In 1978, it was sold to the Ferrocarriles Nacionales de Mexico, Mexico's state-owned railway system. After developing mechanical issues, it became a part source for other engines. Its current owner, Doyle McCormick, a fan since childhood of the Nickel Plate Road line, which also ran PA1s. Worked alongside the Smithsonian to negotiate the return of this unit and one other PA1, the Santa Fe 59L, to the United States. Both locomotives arrived back in the United States in 2000 on Easter Sunday, and extensive restoration began soon after. They're the only two PA1 units in the country. The locomotive now bears nickel plate colors and has been renumbered 190. It's housed at the Oregon Rail Heritage Center in Portland, Oregon. Society here with us. And of course, Doyle McCormick is here too, and he's been talking with a lot of folks. If you see him, please be sure to thank him for sending his locomotive to us. It's a great addition to our event. We're very happy to have it here. 1949 by Electromotive Division of General Motors. The locomotive is 1,500 horsepower with a 567B 16-cylinder prime mover. This locomotive was built for the Chicago and Northwestern as number 4074. It was sold to New Jersey Transit in 1983, where it was renumbered 424 and used primarily for the Hoboken to Dover and Walwick trains. It was retired 2 years later and sat in storage until 1991, when it was donated along with 3 other F7s to the United Railroad Historical Society of New Jersey. We now have the Wabash 1009 E8, owned by the Virginia Museum of Transportation in Roanoke, Virginia. This locomotive is an E8 built in 1951 by Electromotive Division, 2,250 horsepower with 2 567V 12-cylinder prime movers. The 1009 is notable as a 10,000 locomotive produced by General Motors Electromotive Division. It wears the paint scheme of Wabash's passenger trains. It pulled famous trains like the Banner Blue, the Wabash Cannonball, and the Bluebird. When the Wabash Railroad came under Norfolk and Western control in 1964, 1009 was sent to the Virginia Museum of Transportation. The unit underwent cosmetic restoration last year at Norfolk Southern's Chattanooga, Tennessee facility. We have representatives of the Virginia Museum of Transportation here with us today. To stop by and see them in the roundhouse, we'll talk about this locomotive, and they're also here with the Fire Route 611 folks to talk about the restoration and return to service of the NWC. off the turntable, we will pull out the FT.
Well, they said Brandon next week.
This afternoon is